Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the OVM quarterly meeting. My name is Susan Alpole, and I'm the events manager here at OSD. A few meeting logistics before we begin today. This presentation is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to you in a couple of days. And use the control panel to ask questions and select your audio mode. To keep the control panel open, you click View, Menu, and then uncheck the Auto Hide Control panel. And we do have all participants muted today. On the right, you'll see the question toolbar. Please submit questions using the questions panel. And we do have hand raising disabled for today's meeting. And in the handout section, if you would like a copy of today's presentation, you can download that in that section there. And now I'd like to turn it over to Alex Giantonio.
All right, thanks, Susan, appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the OVM quarterly outreach meeting. I think we have a pretty action-packed agenda today, as usual, as we do every quarter. We'll walk through some quick welcomes and introductions for the OVM team, sourcing team, and then our Green Fleet Committee. We'll talk through the state of our telematics initiative and where we are in terms of that rollout. We'll have some updates on the vehicle order and delivery process that we're experiencing right now. We'll also talk through some changes to the annual OVM fee and lease billing structure. And then we'll roll through some statewide contract updates that are currently happening in terms of some bids and rebids. And then we've got some exciting news that we'd like to share in regards to Executive Order 594. It's not news, it's out there in the ether now in terms of what's happening with Executive Order 594. So our colleagues with the Department of Energy Resources will be talking through that in terms of some explanations. And then our colleagues from the Department of Environmental Protection will be giving us an overview and a refresher on the EVIP program. And then as we usually finish out our quarterly sessions, we'll have the opportunity for a Q&A with some pre-submitted questions in addition to whatever questions pop up during the presentation process. Okay, so no real significant changes to report on the Office of Vehicle Management team. Quarter over quarter, I think we're all still pretty intact. We're here. This is just a good reference slide for anybody on the webinar if you're looking to get in touch with anybody from the Office of Vehicle Management team. Similarly with our Green Fleet Committee, we're all still intact. So the Green Fleet Committee is made up of personnel from the Office of Vehicle Management, Department of Energy Resources, Department of Environmental Protection, and also some agency representation, Alan Simons from the Department of Youth Services. And from a sourcing perspective, there have been at least one change. Sarah Sadal, who took over some statewide contracts from Dave Sargent. All contact information here, similar to the previous OVM slide, just a really good resource slide if you're looking for any statewide contract information. I will note, and Dave Sargent will talk about it in a little bit more depth later on in the presentation, but there's a number of VEH contracts that are currently in the rebid process. So VEH 93, VEH 98, and VEH 84A. Okay, I will now turn it over to OVM team member John Martin to talk through telematics.
Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Martin. I am the telematics data analyst for the Office of Vehicle Management, and today I'm just going to be going over where we stand with the project initiative and just a few helpful tips to help you navigate through this new technology. So the rollout update, currently there are 2,338 total vehicles installed across 7 secretariats and 32 agencies. That number is changing by the hour. We have another 800 or 900 vehicles left to install. So we estimate that we're going to be complete with those installations by June 30th, 2021. In the future, once the rollout is done, any new vehicle that your agency purchases that's delivered through Westboro is going to have a device installed prior to you taking possession of it, so you don't have to worry about that. And similarly, any vehicle that you retire, we don't expect you to uninstall the devices. When you retire the vehicle or the asset to the Westboro lot, our lot manager will uninstall the device and we will deactivate it so it's off the books. Those devices are going to be recycled and reinstalled in newly purchased vehicles. And that's just how this process is going to work. So upon completion of the installation, all fleet managers who have assets installed with telematics devices should have access to the telematics portal. If you do not, please let me know. We encourage all fleet managers to begin using the resource as soon as possible. There are quite a bit of different pieces of information that you're going to be able to use immediately, so we encourage you to get in there. Start checking it out, start pulling reports, seeing how it can benefit you, and the portal itself is just going to become more common in your everyday life, sort of once we move out of the installation phase and into really just the data analysis phase. So telematics training, available resources. The telematics vendor has begun conducting a series of webinars that are focused on the following: everything from how the device affects your battery, to how to navigate the different map features, different reports that are available to you, different alerts that you can schedule and either have sent to your email or your cell phone, who to reach out and contact with different questions or issues that you might have, and just the help center in general that's available to you in the portal. It's got a pretty robust amount of information, and it can answer the vast majority of your questions. If for some reason you can't find the answer that you're looking for in the help center, the vendor has a support team set up that you can call, and you can always reach out to myself directly and I'll be willing to help you. So these webinars that we've been conducting so far, they've been recorded. All fleet managers who currently have access to the portal were invited to them. If you are unable to attend, you can view the recording, and we've also distributed those recordings to every single fleet manager. So if for whatever reason you didn't get that email, just reach out, let me know, and I'm happy to forward that information along. Also, for any new fleet manager or any personnel who is granted access to the portal, as a part of the welcome email that I send, I attach some helpful documentation. And also within that email, there are links to those videos. So again, if for some reason you didn't get that, just reach out and let me know. I think it'd be helpful for you to take a look at those. And invitations for upcoming sessions are going to be sent out. We typically do a new training session about once every 3 weeks. And the training sessions, we have a general sort of curriculum or points that we want to hit on, but if there's something that you'd like us to go over in more detail, email me, let me know, and I'm happy to make it a part of the next presentation. So one of the things that we covered in the very first training session that the vendor put on was telematics and the possible impact on the battery life. So vehicles equipped with a telematics device may experience a slight reduction in the number of unutilized days before the starting battery is negatively impacted. This is normal. So in your personal vehicle, if you were to leave your vehicle unused, so not turning it on, not using it in any way, shape, or form, and you just let it sit in your driveway or wherever it's parked, the battery in your vehicle would last around 4 weeks. Could be 3.5 weeks, could be 4.5 weeks, but typically it will last you around a month. With the telematics device installed, that time frame shrinks to somewhere closer to 3 weeks. So what happens is the telematics device has to remain on in constant communication with the satellites. And so while the vehicle is on, the device is collecting data points in 2-minute intervals, and it's collecting and reporting all of these data points through the satellite. Now, when the vehicle is off and in a dormant state, similar to the way that your computer goes into a sleep mode, the device in the vehicle is also going to go into sleep mode when the vehicle is off. And it's going to wake itself up every 12 hours for a 5-minute period. All right, so every 12 hours, the device wakes up, checks in with the satellite just to report location, and essentially just to report to the satellite that, yes, I'm on, I'm functioning correctly, and then it goes back into sleep mode. So the feature is designed to reduce the electrical draw, but not eliminate it. Now, the electrical draw that's being taken from the battery is 40 milliamps, which is an extremely minimal amount. Over time, over long periods of time, several weeks, that small issues. So there's a wide variety of issues. I mean, we all know, you live in New England. It's not an issue necessarily right now, but in 9 months it will be. Extreme cold affects the battery's ability to function correctly. Similarly with age, it's just like anything else. Over time, the battery loses its ability to hold the correct amount of charge, and it just declines with age. So those are all factors that are included in the battery, in just the general battery health. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, the Office of Vehicle Management, although we do have a utilization policy, we acknowledge that a couple of things. We acknowledge that the first is that there are a lot of vehicles that are seasonal vehicles or special use, designated as having a specific use. And as we sort of progress out of the winter months and into the warmer months here, a lot of the vehicles that are assigned to really just sit dormant over the winter are being taken out for the first time. So typically when you let a vehicle sit for that long, I understand that they're being started every so often, but the batteries are just in generally shaky condition after sitting for long periods of time. In addition to that, we're progressing hopefully out of a pandemic where over the past 12 months, utilization patterns have really been very different than they were prior to, obviously, in the pre-pandemic era. And we acknowledge that, and it's just sort of the nature of the beast. We went from having a fleet that was extremely active to now having a fleet that isn't necessarily nearly as active as it once was. So we want to bring this to your attention. Our recommendation is for vehicles equipped with telematics devices, they should be driven a minimum of 45 minutes every 2 weeks. For vehicles that have a telematics device installed and an additional upfit, we recommend 45 minutes every 10 days. If you follow that process, more than likely you will not have any issues. And I think this is a really good sort of an illustration of how the telematics system can benefit your vehicle. So what happens is we've set the system up so that if your battery health is overall running lower, you'll get a device, not a power loss alert, you'll get a low power alert. And essentially that's notifying you that the battery power in general is getting low and you should probably go out and start it or have it dealt with. In addition to that, if the battery completely dies, the device is going to send you an email to tell you that all power in the car has been lost. So ideally you would get the first notification and you would know to just go out and start it, and that will prevent you from walking out one day to a vehicle that's just completely dead and having to deal with either jumping it or calling somebody else to jump it for you. So Vincent McCosey, our maintenance and accidents coordinator, put together this flow chart on the bottom. And we would recommend that if you do run into any sort of battery issue, we ask that you please follow the steps in this flow chart. I would say 99% of the time, if you follow this flow chart, it will resolve your battery issue. If for some reason you get through all options of this flow chart and you still have a problem, then feel free to reach out. I have no issue with sending a technician out to look and make sure that there's no issue with the device itself. But again, we're finding that the overwhelming majority of these issues can be solved with this flow chart. And again, especially right now, just emerging from a pandemic with bizarre utilization patterns or the absence of such, emerging from the sort of the winter months, we're more likely to have battery issues now than ever before. So with that, I will send it back to Cheryl, and I'll be available for questions after the presentation if anyone has any. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for attending today. Next up on the agenda is vehicle orders and delivery times. There's a lot happening right now, so here are some things that are important for you to understand and consider if you're looking to order new vehicles. First of all, there's a chip shortage, which is continuing to affect the auto industry in a way that will still be felt for months from now, with several major automakers still facing production stoppages due to the global chip scarcity. More auto manufacturers have announced production halts caused by the chip shortage, with a number of plants expected to idle into this month, the month of May. Automakers expect the chip shortage to continue to affect the auto industry into late 2021, even as suppliers work to boost the output. The chip shortage was promoted by plant shutdowns in the early months of the pandemic last year as suppliers turned to electronics manufacturers. One of the other shortages that we're seeing is that there's a shortage of seat foam and plastic. Rubber supplies are also getting tight now too. We're waiting to learn more what the next part shortage will be. I don't think that we've seen the end of this just yet. I've read articles where trucks are being parked all over OEM lots waiting on parts, and what they're doing is as they come off the production line, they're pulling out the semiconductors that they have to once they get them in the lot and running them back into the line to be able to continue production on the vehicles. And there they will sit until they get what they need for the rest of the chips, to then put them into transport for delivery out to the dealers. So all of this is causing intermittent shift reductions, or in some cases even plant closures, and it leads to delays for current and future orders. All of the OEMs are impacted. Changing to another manufacturer may not be better, as the part shortage is affecting the entire auto industry, but you can try. I have heard good things about Toyota, but we don't have a lot of Toyotas on contract. And it's also been reported that these challenges will continue to produce supply and demand ripples that will impact the vehicle prices and availability for years to come. So I guess the big thing is what can you do? The first thing that we really think that you guys should go back to your finance department and see, can your funding roll over from FY21 into FY22? Wherever you can do that, that's really going to be important, because you're going to be able to get some vehicles coming in. We also suggest that you stay on top of your vehicle order established, especially if you purchase them outright. If they're leased, Karen is tracking that for all of you, but you need to then establish some backup plans to account for production delays or significant changes to forthcoming orders. And now talking about factory orders, they're still your best option. I know you might think, why? Even with the long lead times and the possible additional delays, you're getting the vehicle at the best possible price. And we really can't say that enough. There's value in it. However, early planning is key to its success, and some patience. Off-lot purchases, they may be an option for you in certain circumstances, but you need to keep in mind that vehicle availability is drying up quickly, and they're just getting hard to find out there. When you do find them, the vehicle may not be equipped with the options that you need, and you may have to settle for less or may even more options than you need, which comes with a higher price tag for you. The other thing to consider with off-lot is that the off-lot fees, the vendor's charge may increase. It may be higher than normal, as seen because there's less of a supply of vehicles to keep up with the high demand. And all of this may lead to having you keep your vehicles in service longer than desired. This will increase your operating costs if no vehicle is found off the lot, or if a factory order is delayed for you. Now we move on to the FY22 vehicle acquisition considerations that you should keep in mind. Again, price increases are inevitable. Therefore, order early in the fiscal year to obtain the best pricing and for availability. Pricing is based upon the order date, not the delivery date. Some of you folks have reached out and said, it's coming in after the price increase. Am I going to have to pay that? No, you don't. Get the order in, it's based upon your order date. So again, get those orders in right away. The other thing is will we see new COVID variants pop up? Will there be new outbreaks due to vaccine hesitancy? All of this could repeat some of the delays that we saw a year ago when factories had to shut down. We even had some of our own vehicle vendors on VEH 98 get affected by COVID, and they said they didn't have the staff to deliver some vehicles. Some of the OEMs too, because of what's happening out there, they might have a shorter or an abbreviated model year for 2022 and start 2023 earlier. So you need to be aware of this and plan for it, because there's different order cutoff dates and different dates when the order banks open that it's important that you're aware of. And also there's reduced availability of port or dealer vehicles. Again, we want you to start planning now, early in the fiscal year. Act decisively and with urgency. Hesitation can often be the difference between securing a vehicle and losing it to another person or a company who moved faster than you. Flexibility will also take your fleet a long way. Exploring alternative models and OEMs may prove beneficial for you. And that's all I have for now, so thanks for your time. And now I'll hand it off to Karen Rasnick.
Thanks, Cheryl. Susan, if you could launch this poll for me, please, that'd be great. We've got a poll question here. Susan's going to walk you through it.
So what percentage of your fleet needs to be replaced in the next fiscal year? You can see this? Okay. 20%, 30%, we're at 40%, 43%, 45%, 50%. Okay, a few more seconds. We're at 53%. Okay. Everyone see the results?
That's some good news. You know, we don't have to worry about the entire fleet needing to be replaced during these challenging times. So this is some good feedback. Thank you for that. And I'm gonna move forward and talk to people about the annual OVM fee and the lease billing. So we've got some changes coming. So what I want to do first is just kind of talk with you about the basics for the OVM fee. Most of you should be aware of the annual fee and the new telematics fee, but just to kind of go over the basics, executive OVM managed vehicles are charged an annual OVM administration fee. It is a single annual chargeback per OVM managed vehicle, and it covers the cost of OVM's oversight and services, all the reporting and support and everything that we do for agencies and reporting back to the Commonwealth on your behalf, or the federal reporting that we need to do, all of that stuff that we do as the oversight agency and support agency for the fleet of Commonwealth. The costs of that are sent back to all of the managed vehicles on a per vehicle basis, and it is included right now as part of the monthly lease rate for leased vehicles that are financed through OVM, and all other vehicles are assessed the annual chargeback once a year. So the rate itself has varied over the years. For FY21, it was just under $220 per vehicle, and included with that this year, the new charges for telematics that was added into the OVM fee. So these charges are, like John Martin was talking about, all of the devices that we've had installed so far, all of those vehicles and all the vehicles that are scheduled to get these devices installed, they have a monthly service fee being charged to us by the provider, GPS Insight. And we are passing that cost on to you guys because that's part of the whole annual OVM fee. We charge for our services, we are a self-supporting agency, all that wonderful stuff that you know about already. This is strictly a pass-through. We don't, charge anything extra. We just calculate out what the fee will be and send it over to you guys as a fee through the chargeback process. So for FY21, because it was an abbreviated year because of the install timing and the breadth of vehicles that are being put in, having these devices put in over a short period of time, that amount was only about $61 per vehicle, and that was included in the annual fee back when it was first sent out, so brought up the total to $280 and change for each of the owned vehicles, and then it was an adjusted amount that was added into the leased billing back in the January billing cycle. So each of the leased vehicles got charged that $61 and change as well. So starting in FY22, because these charges did cause some confusion when they went out, both the fact of the matter is that you're going to get charged the full year, which is the $15.95 per asset per month that has the device installed, and then This next thing that I'm going to be talking about is it's going to be a change for leased vehicles. So right now, leased vehicles have the OVM fee included in that monthly rate, and the vehicles do not have a dollar amount included when you get sent your list of assets being charged the OVM fee. This is just a mock-up of one of the lists that we did. This is representing FY21. Many of you fleet managers may have seen a similar list when the annual OVM fee got sent out via email. This type of list was attached, and you would see all of the leased assets were listed with a $0 value because those amounts were included already in your monthly rate. So what the change is moving forward in FY22 is we're going to remove that portion of the lease rate from the monthly charge, and we're going to basically charge every vehicle, leased and owned, the annual fee on an annual basis. So the new roster will be showing all of your leased vehicles having that annual fee. Instead of $0, there'll be this is an estimate, just so you know. It is not the actual FY22 fee. It's just an example. I don't want anyone to quote me on this number. It's still being worked on. I just threw numbers out here to get something on the page so I could show you the example. But all the leased vehicles will have an amount attached to them for the annual OVM fee. And you'll also notice there's a separate column for the telematics fee. And every vehicle that is getting a device installed is going to have that telematics fee as a separate charge, but it's all going to be sent out as one charge back during the annual OVM fee time frame. So one more thing on this list is where I was talking about all assets that get a device installed will have this charge. Even assets that are not currently managed and being assessed the OVM fee, if they have a telematics device, they're going to get charged the telematics fee. Again, we're just passing through these charges to you, and it's just so we can get all of that wonderful data that John Martin is able to share with you on the utilization and patterns and trends of all the vehicles. Okay. So this, I'm just going to go briefly into what that will look like for anyone who has a monthly lease payment currently. So again, this should be familiar to some of you fleet managers. You may have seen the lease schedule, and this is a kind of a cutout of a portion of that lease schedule where we break down what the total lease rate is and what it includes. So as you can see, the admin fee, that $19 and change, is included currently. Starting in FY22, we're going to take that out, reduce it down to 0, so the monthly lease rate will be reduced. So what will happen with that is we would expect you have already budgeted for the full amount. So you can take that portion, that 19 and change, multiply it by the 12 months. That leaves you, in this case, it would leave you with $235 plus available toward paying off the FY22 annual OVM fee. So the only thing that you do need to budget additional funds for is that telematics fee. Again, which we've been talking about for a while, and hopefully you've all budgeted it in. So my last comments on this is make sure you budget for it. And a reminder, again, any asset which is not normally assessed the OVM fee, but has telematics, such as, big snowplow trucks or fire trucks, just as examples. I know John has worked with many of you on which vehicles need a device and which ones you guys may want to track yourselves. So it may be in addition to the regular vehicles that OVM manages. But if any vehicle that has a device in it will be charged the telematics fee. But if they're not OVM managed, they won't be charged the regular annual OVM fee. All right, so I know this is probably still confusing. So if you have more questions, if you've got one-off questions, feel free to enter them in the questions panel, and we will address them as best we can today. If you have multiple questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, and I can have a more in-depth conversation with you and kind of go through your specific situation if that would be helpful. And just because I am not a Mars expert, I will redirect any actual finance questions to our OSD finance folks. Okay, thank you. And with that, I'm going to transfer over to Dave Sargent.
Thanks, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to take a few minutes to address some high-level updates regarding some statewide contract activity. If you take nothing away from this, take away that we are actively working on each of these, and we will continue to have these services in place for you all. So just to run through them very quickly so that you know where we're at, it's very fluid with each of them. But VEH 100, that's our contract for fuel cards and fuel management services. The fuel management services side of things has already been extended through May 31st of next year. Those are Fuel Master units provided by Syntec. We are separately in active negotiations with WEX on the fuel card portion of things, and we fully expect to have that extended through May 31st of next year as well. I will say that the fuel management service side of things, we have not gotten any interest in that for several years. So short of there being some significant interest between now and early next year, that portion of the contract will likely retire next May. But we will, of course, continue on with a fuel card program, whether that becomes a standalone contract after May of next year or gets integrated into an existing one as a separate category is to be determined. But we will continue on with fuel cards in some form or fashion, but likely not the fuel management services unless, again, there is significant interest between now and the beginning of next year. VEH 113, as Alex alluded to in the beginning, is the replacement for VEH 84A that's currently awarded to Fleet Response. This is not a contract that I manage anymore. Sarah Siddle is heading up VEH 84A and the procurement for its replacement, VEH 113. But I can tell you that they're actively working on that procurement, and it's expected to be in place before 84A expires, which is literally December 31st at the end of the year. And as far as the vehicle acquisition contracts, we are in the process of developing VEH 110 and VEH 111. Both of these are designed to replace VEH 93 and VEH 98, but making the scope a little bit more clear and the lines of separation clearer as well. So VEH 110 will have strictly light and medium duty vehicles up to 26,000 pounds GVW, and VEH 111 will be for your vehicles that are truly heavy duty, over 26,000 pounds, as well as some road maintenance and construction equipment. So both of those procurements are active as we speak. I think VEH 111 may come out a little bit earlier than November 30th, which is when the incumbent contracts are scheduled to expire. So there may be a little bit of overlap with that one in VEH 93, but that's fine. We can have a couple of months of overlap, and then we'll just retire VEH 93 and roll right into VEH 111 only. And VEH 110 should be a clean cutover from VEH 98 on December 1st of this year. So just wanted to, again, give a quick update, let you all know that we're actively working on all of these, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end of this, or you can always reach out to me individually if you'd like. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends at Department of Energy Resources.
All right, thanks, Dave, and thanks to everybody at the Office of Vehicle Management for letting us crash your meeting once again. I know that folks are probably a bit tired of hearing about electric vehicles, but for better or worse, I think electric vehicles are here to stay, and so perhaps is the team at DER who will be hopefully part of these meetings moving forward. So our job here is to talk about the new executive order, and what I'm going to do is just really set the context for that executive order that was signed not that long ago, and I will then turn it over to my colleagues Katie Snyder and Chelsea Keene to walk through some of the details and some of the specifics around the order and what we might expect as next steps. So I think it's really important to start by remembering that what we do here in the state and in relation to the executive order, that is really part of a much broader set of policies and directives that are happening at all levels of government, starting at the federal government, but also, as many of you have probably seen or been reading about, here at the state level. We've talked about this previously, but important to remember that Governor Baker has committed Massachusetts to achieving net zero emissions in 2050, and has directed, and we are in the process of establishing interim goals by 2030 to move us in that direction toward those 2050 goals. Additionally, as you may have also heard, not that long ago, a little over a month, Governor Baker signed a new piece of legislation that had been in the works for quite a long time, really the first significant update on climate policy here in Massachusetts since the last piece of legislation was signed back in 2008, the Global Warming Solutions Act. This is a really important law that really codifies the goals that the governor set into law and creates a number of enforcement mechanisms, not just for overall goals, but also for sector goals, which we'll talk about in a second. And last but not least, in this long and growing litany of policy directives is a new executive order. It is Executive Order 594. This replaces Executive Order 484. And this one is called Leading by Example, Decarbonizing and Minimizing Environmental Impacts of State Government. So next slide, we'll get into just a couple of details around these. So the legislation that was signed by the governor, as I said, really codifies into law the administration's goals and commitment to get to net zero emissions in 2050. And so it does that by creating not just the overarching goal by 2050, but also establishing or requiring the establishing a goal for 2030. Sorry about that. Establishing a goal for 2030, but then also directing the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs to establish interim targets for 2025, 2035, and 2045. And perhaps what's really important here is that if the Secretary determines that the Commonwealth as a whole is not meeting our overall emissions reduction targets, then the Secretary has the ability to set sector-based goals, which would then be enforceable by law. And so transportation sector, for example, is one of those several sectors where a specific target for emissions reductions could be established. Go to the next slide. This is a slide I think we've shown before, but it's just a reminder that the two largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the Commonwealth, in fact, are buildings, which is the second highest. You include residential and commercial buildings, and then transportation, which is the largest contributor to emissions here in Massachusetts. There's a 4-pillar decarbonization sort of roadmap that the Commonwealth has established. You can see them here. Our executive order really focuses on the first 2 of these, so looking at end uses and the energy that we consume in our vehicles and our buildings, and also how are we reducing that energy use in order to make our facilities and make our fleets more efficient before we even get to transitioning away from fossil fuels. Let's go to the next slide. So as I think we all know, the transportation sector in Massachusetts is absolutely a key piece of any of the strategies that we have to be developing. And so as part of that, and certainly there are lots of directives and lots of ideas in the roadmap and clean energy and climate plans coming out of the Commonwealth Energy and Environmental Affairs Secretariat. But clearly what everyone is talking about is the rapid transition away from fossil fuels within the light duty fleet. Those vehicles, I think, as we have talked about previously, are becoming more and more available. The range is growing leaps and bounds, and there is virtually no reason why many light duty vehicles cannot move quickly into electric vehicles. Obviously, the medium and heavy duty sector is going to take a bit more work, and a bit more work both in terms of charging infrastructure and also in terms of OEM development. But we expect to see some of those vehicles start to come out. And certainly in the delivery vehicle segment, we have started to see a number of companies, Amazon to name one, which is moving quickly into electric vehicles as a way to reduce emissions, but also to save costs, given the dramatic amount of transportation and delivery that company has to do. And that's happening elsewhere for fleets that have cargo and delivery vehicles. Let's move into the next slide. So Executive Order 594, we'll kind of move on. I'll just do a couple of intro slides here and then turn it over to Katie. So this order was signed by the governor on a very windy Earth Day last a couple of weeks ago on April 22nd. It essentially takes effect for most of the provisions on July 1st, 2021. There are a couple of exceptions to that, which we'll go over. As I said, it does take the place and replaces the Executive Order 44, which was promulgated back in 2007 and has been kind of the guiding force for state government leading by example efforts since that time. And this order applies to all executive branch agencies and all public institutions of higher education. And the fleet targets, again, apply to those entities and also specifically to the non-revenue fleet in the MBTA. Go to the next slide. So why did we develop a new executive order and why have we been pushing for this? So there's a couple of key reasons. The first one is that our overarching goals and targets have changed. Back in 2007, 2008, a lot of people were talking about 80% reduction by 2050 and didn't have a great sense of what our interim targets need to be. The science has improved dramatically. And so even that 80% reduction target is deemed to be not sufficient. And these net zero goals that are being set Commonwealth-wide and I would say in other states as well, as a result of some of that new science. And so our executive order is trying to catch up to that science and participate in the goals that everyone is deeming to be necessary. Secondly, the old executive order, most of the goals in there expired in 2020. And so we wanted to make sure that we had goals moving forward that would help to guide our programs and guide our efforts. And as is pretty obvious in the vehicle sector, but building sector and renewable energy, you name it, everything in clean energy, energy efficiency, climate, technologies have changed dramatically. Battery storage, just batteries in general, costs have come way down. Costs of many renewable energies have dropped precipitously. And new technologies have just become much better at providing the kind of energy that we need. And last but not least, an executive order is a really golden opportunity for the state to step out and to lead by example, to demonstrate to all the sectors across the Commonwealth that achieving these kinds of goals are achievable, and that we can lead large institutions like state government toward the overall targets and set the example for all the other sectors in the state. Next slide. Gotta do it quick. You can click one more time. There we go. So this will be my last slide, and then I'll turn it over to Katie. There's lots of elements to this executive order that I think is something like 14 pages long. But the focus here really is to prioritize the highest emitting sectors, as we talked about, buildings and vehicles. We target specifically the on-site fossil fuel combustion, and by that we mean all of the fossil fuels we use to heat, cool our facilities as well as our fleets. It is an opportunity to innovate, which is going to be necessary to address what are complex facilities with complex heating systems, as well as our fleets, which tend not to be the same as the fleets or the vehicles across the Commonwealth, which are much more focused on light-duty vehicles. And last but not least, there is a large focus on the transportation or vehicle section segment of state government, and we expect this order to help us accelerate the transition to zero-emission vehicles. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who's going to walk through some of the details.
Great, thanks, Eric. So as Eric noted, although vehicles comprise a lesser portion of LBE emissions than the state as a whole, Executive Order 594 places state fleets at the forefront and sets both overall fleet electrification and new acquisition requirements across vehicle weight classes, as well as targets to boost the number of EV charging stations across the Commonwealth. Next slide. So this executive order directs the decarbonization of fuels used to heat and cool state facilities, help to demonstrate new technologies and strategies to meet energy goals, and quicken the shift to electric heating and vehicles. By leading example in these and other areas, state government, as Eric said, can help guide Massachusetts toward a cleaner future. This executive order, as you can see here, sets a number of short and long-term emission reduction targets through 2050 and establishes some policy directives. We're going to spend some time today just looking at the targets and directives that are specifically relevant for the state fleet. Next slide. So EO 594 sets targets for the portion of the total state fleet that must be electrified over time. As many of you know, the state fleet's primarily comprised of pickup trucks, SUVs, cargo vans, with passenger sedans comprising less than 20% of the current fleet makeup. In contrast, passenger sedans are about 50% of light-duty vehicles in Massachusetts as a whole. So to meet the diverse needs of state operations, many fleet vehicles are going to be required to have specialized outfits and features. And I think because of the unique requirements and distribution of vehicle types, sort of a significant barrier to rapid electrification of the fleet in the near term. So as current model availability increases, and we get more opportunities for some of those heavier and more unique vehicle types, we've essentially accounted for those limitations and have taken a phased approach to increasing the proportion of zero-emission vehicles that comprise the fleet. Next slide. The executive order also outlines new requirements for electric vehicle acquisition across gross vehicle weight classifications. As we just saw on the last slide, by 2030, at least 20% of the fleet must be zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, as we like to call them. To ensure that the transition to ZEVs is not completely backloaded to the latter part of the decade, the order sets some interim targets for 2023 and 2025 for new vehicle acquisitions. I'm sorry, I should clarify, those are fiscal years 23 and 25, for new vehicle acquisitions that are dependent on weight class. So I think, as Eric mentioned, for a lot of the sedans and smaller vehicles, there really are a lot of options on the market now and coming very soon. And so the expectation is that those are sort of the low-hanging fruit. Those are the types of vehicles that, you know, an electric replacement should be fairly straightforward and easy to do, especially as costs are coming down and we see closer to cost parity and with the current incentives, which Chelsea's going to talk about later. And then starting in 2030, the acquisition requirement kind of moves to incorporate all vehicle types, particularly those that are over 14,000 pounds. So I think this just kind of is to give you all a sense of how we've approached getting toward those fleet composition goals by requiring that new vehicles for purchase and lease kind of have this phased approach to bring more electric vehicles into the fleet. Next slide. The order also sets targets to more than double the number of EV charging stations sited at state facilities and includes new construction requirements for both station installation and the creation of sort of EV-ready parking spaces to enable additional charging infrastructure in the future. And I think that this is not intended to be specifically for fleet charging, although that is a key area of priority for the LBE program in the coming years, just given that as more and more of you start to acquire these electric vehicles, we want to ensure that you have charging capabilities that can support that. But there may also be cases where it's appropriate and applicable to also have employee, student, and even public charging accessible. So this kind of encompasses all charging use cases. And again, I think there are currently some great incentives out there, and our team is happy to work with individual agencies and departments to kind of think about a plan for, you know, both installing stations and thinking about where future stations might be sited to kind of help plan ahead and get ready for these influx of new electric vehicles and trucks that are coming to market soon. Next slide. So starting July 1st, state entities that purchase and store diesel fuel at their own facilities have to ensure that the diesel fuel for motor vehicles consists of at least 5% biofuels. I think B5 is commonly how that might be seen as you're looking at fuel contracts. So just wanted to flag that this is one of the requirements that goes into effect along with the executive order itself. So that's something, again, we will be working with OSD and others to help sort of, you know, make this a seamless transition. Next slide. And one other thing that we're very excited about, as we talked about before, that DOER works very closely with OSD and Mass DEP. We work together in this Green Fleet Committee capacity, but we'll also be working with OSD to develop some fleet acquisition and management policies that support the goals of this executive order. So these policies will outline certain procedures to reduce vehicle fossil fuel use to the greatest extent, and that can be things like acquiring zero-emission vehicles, new vehicles that are sized appropriately for the agency task, or the most fuel-efficient models that serve the agency need. It might also include conducting fleet optimization evaluations that incorporate vehicle utilization and total cost of ownership to find vehicles that are ripe for removal or replacement, as well as reducing vehicle miles traveled and increasing efficient driving practices that can support better fuel economy. We will also continue to oversee the fuel efficiency standard collectively, and that applies to the light duty state fleet. And as many of you know, that sets requirements for miles per gallon minimum and alternative fuel vehicle requirements. So we do expect to review and develop new fuel efficiency standard requirements in the coming months. So there will definitely be more to come on that, but I think that that standard is due for an update, and this executive order kind of gives us the capacity to continue to review and update that standard as needed. And now I'm going to hand it off to Chelsea to talk about some of the resources available to help with this transition.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie, for the introduction and making a lot of new information as digestible as possible. That being said, I think we understand that this is a lot of new information, and that familiarizing all of you with these new directives is an ongoing process. And I think since the biggest part of that process is how these requirements and policies play out in your fleets, we thought it would be helpful to first walk through how some of these directives might look in practice, and some of the questions you should be considering with respect to vehicle replacement as we move forward. And so the first question is really about, is there an opportunity to right size or downsize your fleet? So instead of first asking which model am I going to replace my existing vehicle with, rather ask whether other existing fleet vehicles have bandwidth to cover these needs. If the answer to that is no, then is there an opportunity to right size or downsize the specific vehicle replacement? Maybe an SUV can actually do the job of a van, or maybe you can make it work with a smaller pickup model. And so, these are just two sort of broader strategies, right, at how we want to start thinking about our fleets. I think once you know which type of vehicle and size is needed, then it's about identifying if a battery electric model is available to meet those needs. I think one of the key drivers in phasing zero emission acquisition requirements in this EO, so that it's not all expected at once, is that there are limited model and vehicle class options available right now. That being said, there are some full battery electric options currently on contract that can meet certain vehicle needs. And that number and diversity will only increase moving forward. So if there's an available full electric model, that's what you should be considering first. Next best, if there isn't a full electric model available that meets your needs, is there a plug-in hybrid option available? Plug-in EVs do have a gas backup, which is why the EO places priority on full electric. But plug-in cars can sometimes offer more flexibility to support your operations, and really they're the next best option. And then lastly, if zero emission options aren't available yet, asking what high efficiency or alternative fuel models are available. There are a wide variety of hybrid and efficient options on contract right now, and at the end of the day, they not only benefit the environment, but your fleet operations and drivers as well. So that should just be sort of best practice moving forward. So these are some of the things to start considering as you look to replace vehicles in your fleet. None of this is set in stone, but just general ideas. And this should really involve not just a transition to zero emission vehicles, but I think a more critical evaluation of how your fleets operate. And I think I hope you can see these new EO targets, requirements, and policies as an inflection point, as an opportunity to think more holistically, creatively, and also flexibly about your fleets, because that will be needed, especially in this interim. So since a picture is apparently worth 1,000 words, I thought we'd just play this out with a few examples. There on the left, you have a traditional F-150 of some vintage. Let's say you use it primarily for on-campus transport and some maintenance work, nothing too crazy. And you do need a vehicle, a new vehicle, as all the other sort of assets on your site are already stretched. So that first option of of just sort of downsizing the fleet isn't going to work. Normally, you might go with a new shiny version of the same, but you're asking yourself some of the questions that we just kind of walked through. So you say, hey, maybe you can downsize, right? Maybe you can go with a bulk cargo. Let's say if the maintenance work is limited and this can support, broader campus transport for some of your staff. Or maybe a utility EV can do the job. There's some great models available in this sector, and they're pretty diverse and can be quite rugged. And maybe it's next summer and the F-150 EV's out. So you get the old dog with some seriously new tricks, and you don't have to make any allowances. And so in some case, maybe none of these options work, or not yet available. And while you should then certainly look for the most efficient option as a best practice, the EO directives certainly don't mean that you need to, buy this electric golf cart, and that should, that it's expecting you to sort of meet those needs. So we understand not all of this is quite available. I think this is all within good measure, but we do, want to urge everyone to start thinking a little bit differently. Next slide. So I don't think we expect all of this to be absorbed immediately. So this will certainly be the first of many conversations and presentations we'll have on the EO details and rollout. And that the Green Fleet Committee and LBE team will certainly be here to address questions and concerns, I think both later today and just moving forward. So please reach out to us. We are a great resource. That's why we're here. In addition to that, we have been working on a slew of resources and tools that can help support you in meeting the EO directives, from cost of ownership comparisons to technology and funding guides. Some of you we've already helped with, on some of this stuff. I hope it is actually helpful in practice. We'll be hosting a bunch of webinars on the executive order specifically. And so I provided some links here to some of the fleet related ones that might be of interest. Also, many of the OEMs and sort of independent organizations are starting to produce a lot of EV and charging resources. Just listed a couple here. They're pretty cool and very helpful. And of course, it would not be an LBE meeting and presentation if we didn't plug the EV challenge. But I think, as you're looking at, fleet electrification plans or planning to purchase EVs, especially this year, please consider signing up. It's a very good way to show commitment. And also learn from your peers who are undertaking similar efforts right now, and just kind of exchanging ideas and lessons learned. Next slide. And so I think before passing it off, we've touched on this before, but I do want to remind everyone about the funding landscape that is here to support these decarbonization efforts in our fleets. There is utility funding to support the infrastructure work associated with EV charging stations, and National Grid might also support equipment costs. So we can certainly provide more about that. There is a newer program, More EV Trucks, that I'll talk about in a second that's targeted at medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. There's Mass DEP's Mass EVIP program, which our colleague Erin will give a refresher on in a minute. And there's also the upcoming Transportation Climate Initiative program, which starts in 2023. And that will infuse a considerable amount of funding into the region of Massachusetts to support clean transportation efforts. So whether that's bolstering existing programs or creating new ones, we'll have to see, but hopefully lots of money coming, which is always a good thing. Next slide. And so quickly on More EV, we can certainly follow up with this and talk to anyone more about it. But as we've not talked about it before in a previous meeting, just quickly walk through the More EV Trucks program. To be clear, it covers more than trucks, bit of a misnomer, and it really targets electrification in the medium and heavy duty vehicle sectors. It applies to battery electric and fuel cell electric options. Those electric vehicles have to be over 8,500 pounds and with a sale price of over 50,000. So really trying to get at some of those more expensive models that might be cost prohibitive otherwise. The rebates are determined by gross vehicle weight rating. So you see a few different sort of blocks there and groupings. Larger weight classes can reserve incentives as some EV options may be upcoming and not yet available. And the rebates are on declining blocks that are based on the sort of relative number of rebates distributed sort of per that gross vehicle weight class. So again, please feel free to reach out with more. This will not be the last time you hear about it. And with that, I think I will pass it off to Erin to talk Mass EVIP.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. So as she said, my name is Erin Bostwick. I am the Mass EVIP coordinator over with Mass DEP, and just want to give a quick refresher on the funding opportunities that we offer. So we have 5 grant programs. 4 are oriented around charging infrastructure, and 1 is for fleet vehicles specifically. I'll just quickly go through the 4 charging infrastructure programs. The first one is the Direct Current Fast Charging Program, which is a competitive program to get fast chargers installed all over the state. We closed our application period on March 19th, so we're fully engaged in reviewing those applications and hope to see lots and lots of publicly accessible fast charging in the near future. The next 3 are all rolling programs focused around level 2 chargers. Public access, it's just exactly what it sounds like. These will be level 2 charging stations that anyone can plug into for the 8 hours it takes to get a full charge before going on their merry way. And then the remaining 2 are workplace and fleet and multi-unit dwelling and campus charging. These 2 programs are able to provide up to 60% of funding of different eligible costs of hardware and installation for units at apartment buildings with a minimum of 5 places, or at educational institutions for all levels. So that's elementary school all the way right up through universities and colleges. We also have the workplace and fleet charging program. So as you are looking at electric fleet vehicles, this is going to be a great resource for you to potentially apply to and get some charging infrastructure, some support for charging infrastructure at your sites to feed those new cars. Last but definitely not least, we have the fleet EV incentive program. On this one, we offer up to $7,500 towards the purchase or lease of battery electric, plug-in hybrid electric, or zero emission motorcycles that are being purchased by municipalities, state agencies, public education institutions. This program used to include the charging infrastructure as a potential benefit that you could seek funding for, but we've now separated that out to be in the workplace and fleet charging program. So if you want that charger also, you would have to apply for that separately. Next slide. So just to go through some of the impact that this program can have and provide a little bit of a plug for switching to electric vehicles going forward, we have a couple examples. These are 3 sedans that are comparable and available to you through state contract. So the pricing that's here does reflect those contracts. So as you can see, Honda Civic, the initial list price, it looks less expensive than the Chevy Bolt and Nissan Leaf competitors because it's at 22, and these others start around 28. But once you take into account the $7,500 benefit, suddenly the electric vehicles are a little bit more affordable, or at the very least cost competitive in the Nissan Leaf Plus's case, starting around $20,000. Where it gets really exciting from that perspective is if you start looking at the ongoing use and maintenance costs. With the Honda Civic, you're looking at around $1,400 a year, almost $1,500 a year in fuel costs. That's assuming $2.65 a gallon, that prices don't go up, as well as $900 of sort of standard maintenance and an operating cost of nearly $19,000 over the course of 8 years. And that brings the total cost of ownership of the vehicle up to $40,000. Comparatively, when you look at the 2 electric vehicles, you're only looking at $460 of maintenance costs. No oil changes, fewer moving parts that can break. It really makes a difference. And then, of course, your fuel costs are much lower as well, hovering around $800, $900. So the 8-year cost of ownership is between $30,000 and $40,000, give or take, over that same 8-year time period. And that really can make a difference in the long run. And then, of course, the benefits we're really excited about as part of this climate initiative is the massive savings you see in carbon emissions over time. We're looking at a fifth of the amount using the electric vehicles relative to the Honda Civic. And that'll only improve as we do continue to green the grid and things like that. Next slide. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to open up the next poll question So if that could be brought up and handed back to Alex. So really, we just want to know how you want to see these webinars move forward in the future. Stay online, go back to in-person, do a combination, switch back to a newsletter, or go to on-site meetings at secretariats and agencies. Thank you.
We're about at 50%, so I'll just give it a few more seconds. 60%. About 10 seconds left. All right, I'm going to close the poll and okay.
Right. So looks like continue webinars is the winner, followed by combination of in-person and webinar. Makes sense. All right, so we are now going to hop into some pre-submitted questions that came in to us that we had the opportunity to take a look at and provide some answers to, and we'll obviously provide some additional information if necessary. So first question is, how will the telematics portal work? Our short answer is credentials to the portal will be granted to each fleet manager once their agency has been successfully installed with telematics devices. Training is available via webinar with the vendor, and additional resources may be found in the portal's help center. We also have John Martin, a telematics data analyst that is there to provide support or guidance or directions if needed. John, I don't know if you have any other information you wanted to share or context. I think I pretty much
Yeah,
to that.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I think your first resource as a user of the portal is to hop in the help center. I would say, you know, there's probably, I mean, like I said earlier, the information is fairly robust in there. So I would say the chances that you're going to find what you're looking for, I would put at 90 or 95%. We're also doing supplemental webinars with the vendor. There is also a support team that is open normal business hours that you can call. And if all else fails, you can always email me directly.
All right, thanks, John, appreciate it. Next question, is replacement supposed to happen once a vehicle reaches 100,000 miles? It's a good question. I guess the short answer is no, or it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. Our recommendation is that vehicles be replaced when they've exhausted their useful life cycle. We kind of use 4 replacement criteria as our guiding light when we make recommendations to agencies. So we look at vehicles that are older than 8 years old, or look at model year basically as well, or vehicle in service date based on whatever data points that we have from some of our historical fleet data. We do use 100,000 miles or over 100,000 miles on the odometer as one of the replacement criteria for agencies to take a look at. Life-to-date maintenance spend is also important to us. So when we look at life-to-date maintenance spend, that it has exceeded 1/3 of the initial cost of the vehicle. And then the last piece we really look at is the depreciation value of the vehicle. So if the vehicle is depreciated 80% or more of its original acquisition value. And again, for us, we don't necessarily see the vehicle on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, evaluating or having fleet managers evaluate the overall physical condition of the vehicle is very important as well, and can certainly be a contributing factor towards replacement. All right, next slide. What happens with the telematics, the device and charges when a vehicle is turned in? So the device will be uninstalled and deactivated at our holding lot. Deactivated devices, as John had mentioned, or removed devices from existing vehicles can be reused. The telematics fee itself is a one-time chargeback for the fiscal year. It's assessed to any active vehicle or asset. It would represent the full year telematics charge for those assets. As agencies retire vehicles through the year, replacing them with new vehicles, no change to the telematics fee will occur. Full year charge applied to the old vehicle will cover charges for the new vehicle. So as your new vehicle acquisitions come in, as your other vehicles are retired throughout the fiscal year, that same telematics fee would apply for that particular vehicle. If vehicles are retired and not replaced, then again, we would review that on a case-by-case basis to make an adjustment to the annual OVM fee for the telematics charge for that vehicle. And then question 4, there were general comments asking us to speak to the future of electric vehicles, as well as funding and any other information on electric vehicles. I think our partners at the Department of Energy Resources and Department of Environmental Protection did a pretty good job walking through everything that's happening and some future happenings as well in that space. But if there's any additional questions, we're certainly here to answer.
So if you have questions, please put them in the question panel. There was one comment, Alex, just about red paint being a shortage in places now. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on red paint.
Yeah, that's a new one to us. We haven't heard that before. I think Cheryl mentioned, right, there's been a lot of challenges with the supply chain related to vehicle and vehicle production. I would not be surprised if other things pop up as well that are just going to delay the overall production and delivery process. So it seems like every week, every month, new things kind of pop into the equation.
Just to comment on that, to take that a bit further, some OEMs and some models can have restrictions and shortages of things like that, but it's on a smaller scale. Red is not like a popular color that we use, so it may be something that is specific to one of the agencies, and I can look into that if you like. There's always restrictions by the model that the OEMs have. But the chip shortage is huge. We haven't heard anything that was huge like that with regard to color, but you can have restrictions like that.
Yep. Great point.
There were a couple of comments regarding the presentation. This is in the handout section, and you can open that up and download it to your desktop. You'll also get a copy of the recording. There also was, someone was confused by the telematics fees. So Karen, I don't know if you want to talk to that. Alex, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if those are better as maybe one-on-one conversations. So as Karen had mentioned, there's need for additional clarification. It's probably best to reach out to Karen to understand how the telematics fee rolls up into the annual chargeback. Our thought with the breaking out of the annual chargeback from the lease rate is just hopefully an easier way for us and for agencies to calculate the telematics charge on the monthly service fee basis. It's a per vehicle rate. We are expected to hit our lowest monthly per vehicle service charge rate by the start of the new fiscal year. So that would be billed at $15.95 per vehicle per month. And again, rolled up is that individual line item charge at roughly around $192 per vehicle per year for the monthly service charges. So tad bit confusing because we reference monthly service charge because that's the way the vendor bills it to us. but for billing purposes on both department-owned and leased vehicles, I think the consensus is that billing it out on that annual basis and reconciling if needed is the best way to go about it. So again, I would encourage, if there's additional questions around that on the telematics monthly service charge, to reach out to myself or Karen, and obviously we would loop John in as necessary as well.
Okay. There's one comment that the telematics fee will force one of our smaller agencies into deficit for the year. Any help possible?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about telematics for the better part of a year and a half, in addition to the service fees that go along with the telematics charge. OSD is assuming the device costs, at least for the initial round of implementation. We'd be assuming the device cost going forward if we can't reuse that telematics device. But we would hope that these fees have been accounted for and budgeted for as well.
And we have another question. When a new vehicle is acquired, what will be the process for installation of its telematics?
Yep, good question. When that vehicle gets delivered out to our holding lot, that vehicle will be coordinated for installation at that time. So it would either be installed by our lot coordinator, or John would coordinate with our vendor to have that device installed in the vehicle. So when the agency picks up that vehicle from our lot, it will already have the telematics device in it.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any more questions. Anybody?
Just one thing I would like to note, and there'll be a broader conversation and communication about this, but for those of you that are familiar with our holding lot out in Westboro, we're moving off of that lot. Unfortunately, we were informed a little bit ago that property is being redeveloped. So we're currently working with DCAM, and DCAM is looking for alternate holding lot locations for us. We don't know where or when yet. We assume that redevelopment and demo is going to start at some point this summer. So please stay tuned. There'll be more information that I distribute out to agency fleet managers in regards to process, in regards to decommissioning vehicles, where they need to go, new vehicle acquisitions that typically come into Westboro, where those acquisitions will need to go for a limited time frame. We hope that it's going to be a pretty seamless transition for our agencies, but stay tuned. Definitely more to come on that. I just wanted to make a bit of a statement to this particular group in regards to that change.
Alex, I'm not seeing any more questions, so.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending. Thank you to all the presenters. I hope that everyone found the content insightful and helpful, and we'll see you next quarter, and reach out if there's any questions. Thanks all.
Thank you.